You knew the wineglass clink wasn't just crystal. It was a warning shot dressed in silver. She raised her glass at the head of the long cedar dining table, her eyes too bright, her voice too smooth as she announced to your stunned parents, "Your brother and your youngest son still chewing yam casserole. I'll be taking the kids with me after Christmas. We've agreed it's for the best." You didn't look at her. You looked at the lawyer on the screen behind her, paused on the TV by mistake, frozen mid-word from a call she'd lied about being work-related. They thought the dinner was just a festive ceasefire, one last clink before the split. She had practiced this reveal like a script, relying on your silence, counting on your need for calm to choke your response. But you'd stopped choking 2 weeks ago when you discovered the account labeled Echelon West. You knew the betrayal hadn't started in the bedroom. It started in the boardroom 3 years ago, when your idea was still ash on a napkin and she'd suggested he mentor you. The same man whose arm she gripped during a coincidental Miami retreat. The same man now sitting across the table smiling at your son like he belonged here. They thought your stillness meant defeat, that the divorce papers drafted behind your back were the end game. She didn't know you'd intercepted the drafts through a proxy email server you'd installed for family protection. The server that recorded every edit she and your CTO-turned-lover made together. The roast sat untouched in the center of the table as your father cleared his throat, confused. Your mother, always polite to a fault, smiled shakily and asked, "You'll be nearby, though?" But no one noticed your hand under the table, unlocking the silent black box in your pocket. It was time. You knew what she didn't. This wasn't a dinner. It was a data drop. Every whisper she and Miles exchanged behind your back now lived on a flash drive shaped like a bottle opener. Every time she said, "Just take the weekend off," it was so they could overwrite your future in your absence. The boardroom lights at Argent Halo had flickered that week. Not from faulty wiring. No. The building never made mistakes. It was like it knew what was coming. And when you returned from that spontaneous spa retreat she insisted on, your ergonomic chair had already been reprogrammed to access Level 3 security logs without your clearance. They thought you'd lost control because you didn't yell, because you never raised your voice. But that was the thing about power. When wielded correctly, it whispered while they screamed. The key was patience. The key was letting the fire build inside them until they mistook it for their own light. You reached into your coat as she continued with her soft, PR-laced justifications. "We've just decided it's healthier. No more tug-of-war for the kids. Clean breaks are—" She paused as you placed the small black envelope onto your dinner plate, sealed with the corporate wax of Argent Halo. Her voice broke. "What's that?" You didn't answer. You pushed the envelope across the table, past the mashed potatoes, toward your eldest daughter. Old enough to see through a performance, sharp enough to catch the shift in temperature. Inside the envelope was a photo, taken from the hidden ceiling cam above the server room she'd never asked about. A photo of Miles copying proprietary code onto a portable drive, dated, time-stamped, signed into the logs with her ID. They thought they were clever, calling the new shell company Halo South. They hadn't realized the name itself was already flagged by your AI watchdog months ago. That every keystroke after that fed a growing case built not in courtrooms, but in silence. You stood without a word, slowly. Behind you, the hallway flickered. Your lawyer had entered the house, not from the front door, but from the basement access she didn't know you still had keys to. Your youngest asked, "Where's Mommy going?" You finally spoke. She's going to explain, but she couldn't. Not while the sound of wheels, scraping tile echoed from the kitchen entrance. Not while your lawyer entered with black boxes marked Exhibits AD. Not while your daughter opened the envelope and whispered, Is this real? You turned to your father, whose eyes had gone glassy, not with confusion now, but with understanding. He nodded once. He'd been waiting for this too, because you weren't the only one betrayed. Because she didn't just take your children. She took your idea, your company, your life's work, and sold it to the man who used to fix your espresso machine at the office. And now, she would have to watch what happens when you take it back. You knew trust didn't erode all at once. It dissolved, molecule by molecule, in the heat of proximity. It was 2 floors above the wellness center where Miles had first suggested diversification strategies, wrapped in spa towels and false intentions. By the time you installed the lens behind the brass vent grill in the steam room, they'd already sold 12% of your technology to a silent partner in Jakarta. They thought the spa was clean space. No Wi-Fi, no glass walls, just sweat and whispers. But the place had always reminded you of something else. Confession booths dressed in marble, where secrets melted like ice and power traded hands in fog. The first conversation you captured was exactly 23 minutes long. You remember because the steam triggered the timestamp glitch you hadn't yet fixed, and when you re-watched it later that night in your study, the feed looped the phrase, "Let him burn himself out," 3 times in slow motion. She said it. Your wife. The one who once pressed cold hands to your fevered temple and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll protect your time." Now she sat in a linen robe sipping lemongrass water, nodding along as Miles explained how the Halo framework could be rebuilt without his permission. They thought the cameras were just safety compliance, that the building's embedded system was a passive observer, a sleepy guardian for lawsuits and slips. But the firmware had been rewritten by your hands the year before, disguised as a routine update. It didn't just record, it remembered. And when the steam rolled too thick for the lens to see, the microphone picked up the one line you'd play back 1,000 times. "He's too proud to notice we've already taken his throne." You noticed. That week, she started planning the Miami team alignment trip, the same trip you declined, the same trip where she wore the white swimsuit you bought her for your honeymoon. Except now, it showed up in a photo on Miles's private story, tagged from a yacht you used to own. The betrayal wasn't even strategic. It was arrogant. The kind of arrogance that builds when power shifts silently and no one bleeds right away. They thought because you said nothing, you suspected nothing. But you weren't silent out of blindness. You were building. One patch, one camera, one buried clause in the Halo charter that still gave you audit rights, even after they tried to shift board control to unanimous decisions. You remembered when she said, "The board needs consensus these days. It's not about ego." And how she smiled like a PR consultant while holding your legacy over a lit match. But you'd hidden your power not in titles, not in votes, in code. Under the project name Caldera, you began encrypting surveillance feeds, storing them on unlisted servers in 3 time zones. One inside a Hong Kong co-working space you'd bought through an alias, one inside your family cabin's smart fridge, the last and most damning, routed through a VPN built by the intern they tried to fire last quarter. You saved him. He saved you. The second conversation was worse. Miles, drunk this time, ranting about how we'll IPO under the new banner and leave him with a box of golden memories. Your wife laughed. Not the way she laughed when you held her in Copenhagen during your sabbatical. This was different. This was mocking, and it shattered something permanent. The steam room footage would become Exhibit C. Not yet. You needed one more trigger, so you let her touch your shoulder the next morning like nothing. The signal was the first breath of thunder before the collapse, and when it came, you didn't hesitate. You typed 3 words into the reply field. Open the gates. What followed wasn't chaos. It was choreography. Silent alerts rippled through encrypted channels. Audit AI Veritas woke from dormancy and began pushing red flag anomalies to board member inboxes while they slept. Your private team, assembled over 2 years from discarded talent and exiled engineers, began mass data retrieval under Ghost, accounts signed by the CTO herself. She had no idea she'd granted the permissions. They thought they had firewalls. You built their firewalls. You built the cracks within them. Every contract Miles signed under Halo South was already mirrored into a parallel repo marked fraud candidate. Every disbursement above $10,000 had a blockchain footprint indexed by a system you pretended was deprecated. Even the server timestamp anomalies they noticed last week? You triggered those. You knew the trick wasn't just gathering evidence, it was making them confirm it by trying to erase it. The more they deleted, the deeper they fell. Your team watched it all from the hollowed-out basement of an abandoned data center you leased under a subsidiary of a fake wellness brand. It was poetic. She once told you, "You take everything too personally," as if loyalty were some outdated currency you refuse to give up. As if silence meant surrender. But silence is the space just before the avalanche. You didn't sleep that night. You watched the feeds, watched as the internal chat logs lit up in panic. Watched Miles ask, "Why? Are we flagged in Zurich?" Watched your wife hesitate to respond. Because Zurich was never supposed to know. Because Zurich was the final node holding the licensing split, and you triggered the release clause at midnight. The clause that invalidated every new ownership, registration based on shared asset code. The clause she'd signed on her birthday without reading the footer. You watched as the boardroom cameras came online remotely. Not your doing, they turned them on. To discuss you. One final time. And the feed caught it all, the stammering, the denial, the half-truths and carefully measured rage. But what mattered was the moment she said, "He doesn't have the guts to come in person." And that was when the door opened. Not a slam. Not a grand entrance. Just the quiet shuffle of leather soles and aluminum latches. Your lawyer walked in with 2 black boxes and a slim hard case marked 1099 exceptions. His suit was the same you bought him the day he joined you, a test of his loyalty. He never stopped wearing it. He placed the boxes on the table, clicked them open. They thought you'd be there. You weren't. Only your voice came through the conference call. "Gentlemen, ladies, this audit will not take long." They froze, because they recognized the voice, but not the tone, not the cold clarity in each syllable, not the calm destruction it carried. She blinked hard, tried to speak, tried to say your name like it still mattered. But your lawyer spoke over her. "All parties are now bound by Clause 7C. Silence is consent. The floor recognizes the founder." The screens lit up with files, contracts, footage, messages, transfers, dates, faces. Your voice guided them like a ghost through every betrayal, and the signal came through again. This time on her phone, a simple text from an unknown number. "Watch what you built." Then the headlines began updating in real time across the top of the boardroom screen. Argent Halo faces, criminal probe over IP theft, internal coup at tech giant exposed by leaked surveillance. Founder's private archive reveals stolen algorithms, offshore shells. They thought they had stolen your crown. They didn't realize you were the storm they had built their castle in, and now the winds had turned. You knew the sound of the lock clicking was louder than the room allowed. The dessert plates still trembled from the impact as your lawyer stepped across the threshold of your home, the first black box in his left hand, the second trailing behind him like a final act. The kids had retreated upstairs, summoned by instinct more than words, and your wife stood frozen beside the dining table she'd turned into a battlefield. They thought it was still about the children. They thought custody was the prize. But the boxes entering the room said otherwise. Your lawyer, Gideon Marsh, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and always one step out of the shadows, placed the first case on the oak sideboard with reverence, as if it held a crown. The other, he set gently at the center of the table, on top of her perfectly folded cloth napkin. He didn't speak yet. He let the silence expand like a vacuum until even the chandelier above flickered. You sat again. Not at the head of the table, those days were over, but at the side, where generals sat during war, councils. You gestured without speaking, and Marsh opened the first box. Inside were file tabs in alternating colors, crimson, graphite, and deep navy, each labeled with a year. Each representing a fiscal cycle where your empire had been bled dry by people you once invited into your home. She broke first. What is this? Her voice was too calm, too even. Trained for boardrooms, prepped for manipulation. You looked at her the way you once looked at foreign executives who arrived thinking you didn't understand their language. Not with anger, with inevitability. Then you said the words that turned the air electric, your audit. They thought audits were numbers, columns and gaps and compliance gaps a good lawyer could explain away. But this one wasn't built in Excel or carried out by third-party firms who'd later accept golf invites. This was narrative. This was story told through receipts and keystrokes, surveillance feeds and signed clauses. And the story ended with a crown that couldn't be stolen. She tried to scoff, tried to pivot. You're seriously doing this here? In front of our family? Our family is upstairs, you replied. This is just business. The second box clicked open. It wasn't paper, it was digital. 2 drives, 1 air-gapped system. 1 identical clone loaded with evidence under sealed chain of custody protocols. She recognized the logo on the black chrome hardware. Echelon Forensics. The same firm she'd recommended you not use 2 years ago because they were too paranoid, too aggressive, because they couldn't be bought, because they belonged to you before she ever knew they existed. Miles wasn't here, but his name echoed through the files now displayed on the 8K projection screen that folded down from the recessed ceiling, emails, drafted escape clauses, time-stamped private server syncs, photo metadata from the Miami trip, adjusted 6 minutes after upload to scrub the yacht's GPS. You watched her shoulders collapse 1 vertebra at a time. She said nothing when the spa footage played, when her voice came through the speakers saying, "He built it, but we'll wear it better." Marsh read from a single page. This dossier contains evidence of collusion, theft of intellectual property, illicit funneling of corporate assets, and intentional breach of fiduciary duty. She lunged for the drive. Not out of rage, desperation. But Marsh was faster. He placed one hand flat on the table between her and the evidence, fingers spread like a verdict. "You move again," he said, "and I'll consider it destruction of sealed materials." She sat, and for the first time, you saw it. Not guilt, not regret, but terror. Because the truth wasn't in the files, it was in the room. They thought you were soft, because you loved gently. They forgot you also built an empire alone. Your parents didn't speak. Your brother leaned back in his chair and let out a long, low breath. Only your daughter, standing just outside the doorframe, whispered to herself as the footage ended, "Mom, why?" And that was when Marsh slid the final envelope across the table. Gold seal, red wax, the imprint of a scale. "This is the revocation of her executive status," he said. "Signed by every remaining voting member of the board. Every one of them having received a dossier the moment your signal gave the word, even those who'd once backed Miles, even the ones who toasted your graceful exit just weeks ago." They'd turned, because you didn't just expose betrayal, you made compliance impossible. To side with her now was to sign their own resignation letters, and they knew it. Because the signal had gone global. The files were already in the hands of investigative journalists, the Department of Justice, and 5 key venture partners. Every leak perfectly timed to arrive just as the news cycle slumped into holiday boredom. Now it roared again, with her name as the fuel. You stood. Your daughter stepped forward. Your wife opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She'd prepared so many speeches, so many justifications, but none of them worked in a room where her reflection on the wall monitor was caught mid-laugh while betraying the man who built her throne. "This wasn't the time," she whispered, as if that mattered. You replied, "You had all the time." And then Marsh closed the boxes. The room dimmed. The lights flickered. Again, not from power. From knowing. The war was no longer cold, it had gone live, and she had just lost her empire.